Hello guys, welcome to the channel. In this video, I'll talk about LiveData and Flow. If you are still confused, where to use Flow and where to use LiveData, then please stay with me until the end of this video. We'll figure out what exactly is cold flow and hot flow, and what are scenarios we should avoid using LiveData, or what are scenarios we should consider using Flow rather. Just a quick overview of the project that I have here. Nothing special here. I have a main activity wherein I have one nav graph with two fragments, user fragment and detail fragment, and then I have a view model. Okay, so LiveData, as you know, we would mostly use it within the view model to pass the data from view model to the UI. So let's quickly create LiveData. So we'll create first backing property. So the backing property is something private, and only view model can update the value, and it ensures that the writing is only done through view model. No other class should be able to write it. Okay, and then we'll have the readable property of LiveData. Okay, now let's quickly create a function. I guess I do have a function here, user details. Let's say we are fetching our user details from our repository or data layer. So I'll write something like view model scope dot launch, and then repeat. So I'll try to explain maybe in a bit why I'm using this repeat and delay here. Okay, so also we can have some sort of logs here. I'll put a tag as LiveData and message emitting value, and this is how I post the value to the LiveData, user LiveData dot post. All right, so what I'm trying to do here is it's just a loop that runs for 20 times, and there is a delay of 2 seconds before every time I update my LiveData. Now let's quickly go to our fragment, and here we'll observe the LiveData within onView created, and to observe the LiveData, we'll just call the LiveData as user view model dot user LiveData dot observe, and then your lifecycle owner. If it is fragment, we should have view lifecycle owner, and if that is activity, we can use this. And then I'll try to update the text within my text view, which is TV LiveData, setting the text, and let's also put one log statement. Okay, now let's try to run that. As you notice, it's emitting and consumed, right? It's emitting the value and it consumed the value. Now let's just put our this fragment into non-visible state. That means your on pause or on stop should be invoked. So I'll just press the home button here, and now you see it's not getting consumed. The values are not getting consumed here. Okay, another thing to test when we work on LiveData, the best thing that we get from the LiveData is it always maintains the state. Now if you notice, the last emitted value was this. Now if I relaunch my app, I should get the last value. That's exactly how it behaves. So this is what LiveData is all about. Okay, so and let's say if I have one more observer here, if I add one more observer here, so both of the observer will get the latest value from the LiveData. Okay, and the LiveData would be shared among those observers. So yes, this is exactly how LiveData works on. To quickly recall, so our LiveData is observable data class holder. It can hold data, and it can be observed from your Android components, right? And LiveData is a lifecycle aware, which we have already seen that. And yeah, and another benefit that we get from the LiveData is all the subscribers, new or old subscribers, they would always get the latest data, and it always check if the subscriber is active before publishing the data. Okay, now let's try to test the same thing with the flow. So quick definition for the flow, would be flow. They are written on the top of coroutines and they emit multiple values sequentially. And it's a stream of data that can be computed sequentially. Okay, we'll see that in more detail when we write a functions for that. And the flow has a intermediate operators, way more operators than what we have in the LiveData. So it's basically an alternate to Rx Java. So we can just say bye bye to Rx Java. Okay, and flow by nature they are not lifecycle aware, which purely makes sense because flow is something we get from Kotlin, and LiveData is something which is very coupled to the Android ecosystem or Android framework. So flow is kind of not lifecycle aware, but we can make them a lifecycle aware if we know how to call them properly. We'll see that also in detail. So yes, the flows, we have cold streams and hold streams. That also I'll explain in a bit, but just a quick definition. Cold flow is something that will not emit any values unless we apply any terminal operator, or we can say unless anyone starts consuming those values, collecting those values. So that is cold. Hot is as soon as that reference for that flow is there in the memory, it'll continue to emit the values. Okay, but yes, there are some tricks which we'll see now, that how to make our flow either cold or hot flow the lifecycle aware. We'll also see that. Okay, all right, so let's try the same thing with the flow. So I'll quickly go to my user view model. Okay, so in your practical application or live application, you will have something called repository within your user view model, or let's say some use cases, and you would fetch the data from use cases and repository, and view model will have a reference to that, or kind of a trigger that get me a user details, and then whatever results you get from the data or repository layer, it's get pushed to your fragments. So kind of similar thing I have here, but yeah, it's purely I'm not using any dependency injection frameworks here, which is totally out of scope of this video. So let's try to keep things simple here. So I have a repository. So this is the function that will fetch me let's say the user details or user location, and I'm just calling this repository function user location flow, and I'm returning the flow here. So let's go here. Okay, so let me delete all this and let's see how we can create a flow. Okay, so we have builders like flow, and there is something called callback flow. Okay, so yeah, so callback flow is something similar to suspend coroutines, if you are aware of that. If you have any asynchronous call happening, let's say a third-party library or anything which is from the non-coroutine world, and if it is a one-shot operation, one-shot callback, you would use suspend coroutine. And for the flow, since flow is a stream of data, and if there is any API which returns the callback like every 2 seconds or 5 seconds, we can use something called callback flow. Okay, for this video, let's keep the thing simple, and we are going to use the very basic one, which is the flow builder. Okay, and I'll now do the same thing which we tried with the LiveData. Now let's go to user view model. So I'm just getting a reference to it, and so let me write this again for you. Okay, to collect the flow, let's say if we try collecting or observing like LiveData, so I would say user view model dot start cold flow. Okay, so this is my flow, and now if I say dot collect, notice it say it should be called from a coroutine or another suspend function. So for that we can simply use view lifecycle owner dot launch, view lifecycle owner dot lifecycle scope dot launch. Okay, so we'll see this thing launch when started, launch when resume, and when created. But now let's just focus on the launch. Okay, so now I'll just copy paste whatever we did for the LiveData, log statement and setting to the text view. I'll change this text view as I believe I have a flow text view. Okay, and I'll change the tag to flow. Okay, now let's run this. Okay, so I'm collecting this. If you notice, I'm collecting this when the fragment gets created, and let's just comment that, and on the click as well. Yeah, on the button click as well. All right, now if you notice, it starts emitting the value and it's getting consumed, which is perfectly fine. One thing to know. Now let's see, when I say it's cold, and like I said before, it will not emit unless we start collecting it or applying a terminal operator. So in this case, this collect is a terminal operator. So let's just comment this part. Okay, let's comment the collect part. Now let's run that. Okay, now if you see, there is no emission. The flow is not emitting anything, right? So this is exactly what we define as cold flow. Now let's test the same thing which we tested with the LiveData, as in when I make this fragment non-visible state. Let's see what happens in that case. Okay, so now if we say it started emitting and consumed. Okay, so let's just press our home button and let's see what happens. The fragment on stop is called, and it's emitting and consuming. I mean, it's still working. So is it the flow is, even though we mentioned lifecycle owner dot lifecycle scope within this fragment, and it's still emitting the values. Okay, so the reason for that is when we use lifecycle scope dot launch. So lifecycle, this will suspend this coroutine only when your fragment goes to on destroyed state. Okay, so if you want to try that, we can try that also. Let's go to our main navigation. So while moving to the new fragment, that is other fragment, details fragment, let's clear this fragment. So I'm just trying to create that scenario wherein we can destroy this fragment. Okay, so pop up to this one. Okay, let's see what happens now. Okay, it's emitting and consumed. I'll move to the next fragment. Okay, so if you see the fragment on stop, and definitely the fragment destroyer is invoked, and this is something called my view model is cleared. So anyhow, so it's not emitting the values now. Okay, so but yeah, most of the cases, when you are listening to your cold flow or any flow, let's say in your some fragment or something, maybe you don't want to listen, and most of the time you don't want to collect the values when your activity is in on port stop on when your activity or fragment is in on port state. So let's see how we can fix that. So launch, we now know launch will only suspend this coroutine when it goes to the on destroyed stage. Okay, now let's try with something called launch when started. Okay, so launch when started, this would suspend the coroutine whenever it reaches the on start on stops, right, and it will resume that when it comes to on start again. Okay, so if you see, it's emitting, consumed, emitting the value, consumed, fine. Let's press our home button. Okay, it's not emitting now and it's not consumed. Sounds great. Now let's say I relaunch my app again. Now if you see, it resumed from where it left. So last emitted value was 4 and it resumed from 5th value. Okay, so if you need this sort of behavior, launch when started is fine, because launch when started, it will just suspend the coroutine in between whenever your activity goes to on start or on stop. Okay, now let's see what if we follow this approach, which is the recommended one, which is view lifecycle owner, return lifecycle, and started. Let's see how it behaves. It's emitting, consumed, fine. Press the home button. Perfectly fine. Now I'll relaunch the app. Wow, see, it started from the beginning now, from 0. Reason for that is like I said, for launch when started, it just suspend the coroutine and resume from wherever it left. However, with repeat on life cycle, it would just cancel it, okay, and start again. So it's something like let's say you have a job which you would have a reference somewhere outside of this block, and you canceling on the on stop, and then it's restarting. So the repeat on life cycle would do the same thing under the hood. That is, it will cancel this on stop, and then it will start again. Okay, so that's the reason it's the recommended way. Okay, but we'll see that for hot flow, this approach is this is the only approach that will work for hot flow. We'll see that also. Okay, so that is the about repeat on life cycle and that. Okay, another thing for cold flow is it cannot have a multiple subscribers or consumers. So every consumer will have their own copy of flow. Okay, so let's try to see that. So if you notice here, this collect flow I'm calling from, one is on view created, okay, and then on the on click also. So one consumer, and when I click, there should be another consumer also. So let's try to see that. Launching the app again. Okay, it's emitting 0. Okay, so one emitter, one consumer, perfectly fine. Now I'll click on the collect flow button. Now you notice, see, there is one more flow started, which is started from 0. Okay, now you see, 2 emitters and 2 consumers we have now. One is emitting 10, one is starting 6. So that means it's not similar to LiveData, where LiveData, it gets shared between the different observers, and they all get the latest value. That is not the case with cold flow, at least. But yes, we can, if we use the hot flow, this thing can be easily sorted out. So let's now talk about cold flow. Okay, before that, so let's also try this thing. Let me just stop that. Does the flow retains the value, retains the state, like as the LiveData always retains the last value? Let's see that. Okay, so if you see consumed value, last value is 2. I'll move to the next fragment, that is on stop invoked. Now when I come back, no, it won't retain the value, right? So the cold flow, it never retains the value. Okay, so I think that's about the cold flow. Now let's see one another type of flows, which are shared flow and state flow. Okay, so let's quickly go to a user view model, and we would create variables similar to what we created with LiveData. First, a backing property for our state flow, and then the read-only property for the state flow. Okay, so user state flow, mutable state flow, and the state flow always required us to pass the initial value for that. Okay, so I'm just passing this state initial value, and that's it. Okay, so state flow is a special kind of shared flow. Okay, so both can be shared. The limitation of cold flow, we have seen that with the flow builder, uh, which is the default, I would say, flow is declarative or cold by default. So that flow, we have seen that it not get shared between the different consumers. However, the shared flow and the state flow, they are shared between the consumers. The only difference is that state flow always retains or always maintains the state. That's why its name is state flow. It always maintains the state. However, the shared flow, you can achieve that functionality too with something called a replay. If you see this replay, this means whenever there's a new subscriber attached to it, or whenever you reconsume the values from this, you can say, okay, give me last 10 values. Let's say you want to get the location history for 10 locations, then you can use that state flow. And how to use that is pretty much similar to LiveData. So I'm just setting this value to the state flow, and in the user fragment, now let's just stop listening to the cold flow. On this button, I'll invoke this thing which will set the value to the state flow. and I hope I have written somewhere, yeah, collect state flow. So I think now we already know how to use that. So this is my state flow. I'm collecting the value. Certainly it should be called from the suspend function. That's the reason I'm using this. Okay, and then I'm setting the value here. Okay, now let's just call this thing on view created. Okay, let's run our app. Okay, now if you see, I did not press this thing, which my button state flow, that's actually setting the value. So this exactly is about the state flow. It gives me the previous value. We when initiating this, we already have passed some initial value. Okay, now if I click the button state flow, you would see the text is getting updated with the text updated. Okay, now let's see when we say it retains the value. Let's move to the next fragment and now come back, and if you see, it has retained the previous value. So that's how it works. So like I said, so similar way the shared flow will work. Only difference is that with the shared flow you can replay multiple values. So how to decide which one to choose from shared flow and state flow? The rule of thumb is, if you need to have the latest value at any point of time, you can use the state flow. And if you want more than latest value using replay, then of course you can use shared flow. One more thing to notice here is state flow. State flow will never give you the repeated values. Okay. However, the shared flow, you can have the repeated values. That's the only high level difference between both. Okay. Now let's check hot streams. So now we know state shared flow and state flow. Uh, we can use those for hot streams. So hot stream is something like it will just start emitting the values even though there is no consumer to that. Okay, but yes, there are some ways wherein we can inform the hot stream, or we can make our hot stream to emit only when there is any active consumer for that. Okay, so for that, what I'll do is I'll go to my view model as always, and okay, so this is my cold flow, right, which we have seen earlier. Okay, now we can make this cold flow to hot flow using like sharing. If I want to make it a shared flow, okay, and the parameters that I need to pass is was the scope. So I'm passing the scope from my view model here, and then this thing is important. Sharing stated sorry sharing started eagerly. So this will see, and then we have to pass the replay. I want to pass it once. All right, so let's see, there are three uh, you know uh, properties here. The first one is this one, which is it start immediately and never stops. Okay, even though if there is no consumer, it will just start whenever there's a reference to this flow. And then lazily, as the name suggests, it will start whenever there's a first subscribers, and then it never stops. Okay, this is what we are most interested in while subscribed, and most of the time we'll be using this one. So while subscribed is, as the name says, whenever there is any consumer or subscriber to it, only then it will start emitting the values. Okay, so to demonstrate, let's try with the eagerly. Okay, so right, it'll start emitting immediately. All right, so same thing, I'll just collect the flow. Okay, collecting the flow. So let's keep it this thing only, repeat on life cycle. And like I said, your cold flow will work perfectly fine with launch one started also, but this whole flow, we should always use the repeat on life cycle. I'll explain try to explain once again by calling with launch when started cold flow. Okay, cool. So if you are guys still with me, please do like and subscribe this channel. All right, so let's launch the app again. Okay, now if you see, it started emitting and consuming the value, right? Looks like very similar to hot flows. All right, so now let's move to the next fragment. and now if you see, it's still emitting the values, right? Even though I have mentioned here, repeat on life cycle, you cancel the coroutine, but you notice it, it's still emitting the values. That's exactly what hot stream is. Even though there is no collector and there is a reference to that anywhere in the memory, it will continue start emitting the values. Okay. So how can we make them more life cycle aware so that they won't emit when I'm not listening to that, if that is a requirement in something. Let's say uh, there is from your data you are continuously sending some stream of data, let's say location, and when the user is not at that particular screen where you intend to show the location, then there is no point for your hot stream or whatever stream you're using to continue emitting the values. We can stop that. Okay, so for that nothing to be changed here. Okay, yeah, so one more thing, let's try. uh, Most likely you know the how it will behave, but just let's give it a quick try. I'm just calling this hot stream and I'm not collecting it. Now you'll notice that it will start emitting the values. It's emitting. Okay. Okay, now let's try to make this more lifecycle aware. We want to stop the mission when we are not listening to it. Okay, for that we'll quickly go to our do module here. Yeah, fine. So we have seen this value. Now I'll say while subscribed. Okay, that's it. That will do the magic. Launching the app again. All right, so it's emitting consume, fine, because I'm collecting it here. Now let's press your home button on stop. Cool, nothing. Right, now let's see, which I have explained it before. For cold flow, launch once started works perfectly fine. However, for hot streams, this is not the case. Okay, it's emitting and consuming, and I'll press the home button. Okay, it's still emitting, right? And this was not happening with the cold flow, right? Why is it that? So the answer for that is, like I said, launch one started would just suspend this thing, right? And if you see this while subscribe, so why this is happening is, as we know, with launch one started, it's gonna just suspend the coroutine when the fragment goes to the on stop stage. And for the while subscribe thing to work, there is something called a subscription count. Subscription count should move from 1 to 0, or whatever, n to 0. So in this case, your coroutine is just suspended. That means the subscription count is still there, right? However, when I use the repeat on life cycle, as it cancels the coroutine when it goes to on stop, and that means when it's cancelled, the subscription count goes to 0, right? And that's how it works. So that's a reason we should always use repeat on life cycle. Okay, I hope that clears this thing. The quickly recap, we should always use repeat on life cycle when we are working with the hot streams, and we can make flow work as a live data. And it's not like we are just making flow to work as a live data. Flow have way more capabilities than live data, and they are best suitable for lower layers. Your UI layer and your view models, they are closely coupled to your Android framework, and it purely makes sense to use something like as a live data. But in your below layers, which should be independent from your Android framework, it make much sense to use something called flow there, right? And we can obviously control the flow emission based on the life cycle, and even the consumer part, we can consume that. So yeah, that's it guys. Thank you.